I thought my son was giving me the perfect birthday gift when he packed me off to a luxury spa for the weekend. I had no idea he was just getting me out of the house so he could sell my most prized possession right out of my own garage. He and his wife thought I was just a tired old woman they could easily manipulate. But they made a massive mistake. They thought they owned the life I built for them. Wait until you hear what happened when they finally saw the name on the family trust. My name is Beatrice. I am 65 years old, and for over 40 years I poured every ounce of my strength into the public school system as a high school principal. After my husband Calvin passed away, I raised our only son Jamal all by myself. I worked late nights, stretched every dollar, and poured all my love and trust into making sure he grew up to be a strong, successful, and honorable man. And for a long time, I truly believed I had succeeded. Jamal had a good career, and he recently married Chloe, a 32-year-old white woman who always carried herself with an unmistakable sense of entitlement. I gave them nothing but my absolute support, believing that a mother's sacrifice would naturally be met with respect. That illusion shattered completely on the weekend of my 65th birthday. Jamal and Chloe came over with bright smiles and a beautifully wrapped envelope. Inside was an all-expenses-paid 3-day trip to a luxury wellness spa just outside the city. Chloe smiled sweetly and told me how hard I had worked my entire life, and how I deserved to finally go relax and be pampered. I packed my bags, feeling so grateful, so blessed, to have a son who cared about my well-being. But on my second afternoon at the spa, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. A man's voice on the other end sounded impatient. He asked if I was Beatrice, and then complained that he was standing right outside my driveway, waiting to look at the vintage Chevrolet. That car was my late husband's absolute pride and joy, a flawless classic we restored together before he passed. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach and asked the man what he was talking about. He chuckled and said he had a scheduled appointment with my son Jamal to buy the car for cash today. Then he said the words that felt like a slap across my face. He told me Jamal had warned him that I was getting old, losing my mind, and just desperate to offload the vehicle quickly. The phone almost slipped from my trembling hand. My own son had shipped me off to a spa just to steal the last piece of my husband's legacy right out from under me. I sat on the edge of that plush spa bed, staring at the phone in my hand as the chilling reality washed over me. Instead of panicking or breaking down in tears, a sudden sharp clarity pierced through my mind. I thought back over the past 3 years since Jamal had married Chloe, and suddenly every strange look, every slight, and every backhanded compliment made perfect sense. Chloe was a woman who always carried herself with a heavy air of unearned superiority. From the very first day she stepped into my modest suburban home, her bright blue eyes scanned my worn furniture and faded carpets with barely concealed disgust. She would plaster on a tight little smile and make comments that felt like tiny paper cuts to my soul. She would say things like how she admired my ability to live in such a cramped, outdated space, or she would offer to hire her interior designer to bring my home out of the dark ages. She spoke to me with a slow, exaggerated pronunciation, as if my age or the color of my skin somehow made me incapable of understanding basic English. I swallowed my pride every single time, because she was the woman my son chose to love. I watched her parade around in her designer dresses, carrying handbags that cost more than my first mortgage, boasting to anyone who would listen about the sprawling 5-bedroom estate she and Jamal shared in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. She loved hosting lavish dinner parties, where she would proudly proclaim how her brilliant husband provided her with a high society life. She looked down her narrow nose at my coupon clipping and my sensible shoes, treating me like a pathetic charity case who simply did not belong in her refined world. Jamal would just stand there, swirling his expensive bourbon, letting his wife openly disrespect the mother who worked multiple jobs to put him through college. I remembered a holiday dinner just last Thanksgiving, where she loudly suggested I should start wearing a medical alert bracelet because I had misplaced my reading glasses. She smirked at her friend making a spectacle of my supposed decline, and Jamal simply laughed along with her. My own son, the boy I carried in my womb, allowed me to be the punchline of their cruel jokes just to keep his demanding wife entertained. But the bitter irony was that Chloe had absolutely no idea whose money was actually funding her extravagant masquerade. She did not know that for the past 2 years, I had been quietly emptying my own retirement dividends to pay off the suffocating credit card debts Jamal kept hiding from her. Every single month, without a word of complaint, I transferred thousands of dollars to keep their luxury cars from being repossessed and their massive mortgage from going into default. I sacrificed the peace of my golden years to protect my son from losing his home, and in return, his wife treated me like an ignorant peasant. She lived like a queen on a throne, built entirely by my silent labor. Yet she dared to treat me like dirt on the bottom of her expensive heels. But all of her arrogant little comments paled in comparison to the viciousness of what they were trying to do to me right at this very moment. The man on the phone had specifically asked about the vintage Chevrolet. That car was a pristine cherry red 1969 Chevrolet Impala. It was not just a piece of machinery to me. It was the physical embodiment of the love I shared with my late husband, Calvin. We spent countless summer evenings in our garage, our hands covered in motor oil, restoring that beautiful machine, inch by inch. When Calvin got sick, when his strong heart finally began to give out, he squeezed my hand and made me promise I would keep that engine roaring. Driving that car was my ultimate freedom. Cruising down the highway on a Sunday afternoon with the windows rolled down was the only time I still felt Calvin sitting right there beside me, his scent still lingering in the old leather seats. Jamal knew exactly what that car meant to my soul. He used to sit in the passenger seat pretending to drive when his feet could not even reach the pedals. For my own flesh and blood, to invite a total stranger to my home, handing over the security code to my private garage, just to sell his father's legacy for quick cash, was a betrayal so profound it made my chest physically ache. But as I sat there in that quiet spa room, the true horror of their plan began to reveal itself. This was not just about greedy kids wanting some fast money to cover their reckless spending. The spa trip was a calculated decoy. They had sent me away so they could breach my home and strip me of my independence. That Impala was my only mode of transportation. Without it, I would be completely stranded in my quiet suburban neighborhood. I would not be able to buy my own groceries, go to my doctor appointments, or attend my weekly church services. I would be forced to call Jamal and Chloe for every single errand. Chloe had been planting the seeds for months, whispering loudly at family dinners that I was getting too fragile to be behind the wheel, claiming I was becoming a danger on the road. They wanted to cut off my legs. They wanted to trap me in my own house so I would become entirely dependent on their mercy. They figured if they took away my mobility and convinced everyone I was losing my mind, I would eventually surrender. They were setting the stage to declare me incompetent so they could shove me into some cheap state-run facility and take full control of everything I owned. They truly believed I was just a tired old black woman who would quietly bow her head and fade into the shadows. They thought the grief of losing my husband and the exhaustion of old age had made me weak. They assumed I would just cry over the stolen car and accept my fate as a helpless burden. But as I gripped the phone, the initial shock evaporated, replaced by a burning, righteous anger. I was not going to be a victim in my own life story. They had mistaken my quiet patience for foolishness, and they were about to learn a very painful lesson about the woman they were trying to destroy. I did not scream. I did not call Jamal and demand an explanation. After 40 years of managing unruly high school students and navigating the politics of the education system, I knew how to handle a crisis. You never let the offender know you are onto them until you hold all the cards. I politely went to the front desk of the wellness spa, settled my incidental charges, and requested a taxi. The ride back to the city took nearly 2 hours. I spent every single minute of that ride staring out the window, watching the highway lights blur past, letting the burning anger harden into absolute ice. When the cab finally pulled into my quiet suburban street, the sun had already set. I asked the driver to drop me off a block away so the headlights would not sweep across my front windows. I walked the rest of the way in the cool night air. Sure enough, Jamal's shiny black luxury SUV was parked right in my driveway. The audacity of them, using my house as their personal lounge, while they thought I was miles away, getting a deep tissue massage. I did not march up to the front door and throw it open. I walked around to the back patio. I still had the original key to the heavy wooden back door, the one that always stuck slightly if you did not push it just right. I turned the key with the slow, practiced precision of a mother who used to check on her sleeping child without waking him. The door opened without a sound. I slipped into the mudroom like a ghost in my own home. The house was mostly dark, but a warm, golden glow spilled out from the main living room down the hall. Along with the light came the distinct clinking of my good crystal wine glasses and the loud, arrogant laughter of my daughter-in-law. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, completely hidden in the shadows, and edged my way closer to the living room archway. My heart was thumping a heavy, steady rhythm against my ribs. I held my breath, waiting to hear exactly what kind of monsters were sitting on my living room sofa. I could smell the expensive takeout they had ordered, probably paid for with the same credit cards I had been secretly bailing out. Every step I took on the hardwood floor was calculated. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked, a benefit of living in a home for over 30 years. I positioned myself just out of sight, close enough to hear every single syllable spoken. Chloe's voice cut through the quiet house, high-pitched and dripping with that condescending tone she reserved for people she deemed beneath her. I peeked around the edge of the doorframe just enough to see her. She was sprawled across my custom upholstery, with her shoes resting right on my mahogany coffee table, holding a glass of my vintage red wine. "Once that guy hands over the 40,000 in cash for that rusty old junk car tomorrow," Chloe said, taking a large gulp of wine, "I can finally pay off my platinum card. Do you know how embarrassing it was when my card was declined at the boutique last week? I swear your mother holding onto that hideous vehicle while we are struggling is just pure selfishness." I felt my jaw tighten. That hideous vehicle was the last thing Calvin and I restored together. Jamal was sitting in his father's favorite armchair, leaning back with a relaxed grin that made my stomach turn. He did not defend his father's memory. He did not defend me. He simply chuckled and raised his glass to hers. "I know, babe. But relax, it is practically a done deal. The guy is bringing the cash tomorrow afternoon. My mother will be stuck at that spa getting mud wraps until Sunday. By the time she gets back, the car will be long gone, and we will just tell her it was stolen. Or better yet, we will convince her she forgot she sold it." Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Honestly, with the way her mind is going, she probably will believe it. Which brings me to the next phase of our plan. We cannot keep playing these games to get cash out of her. We need to expedite things. I was looking online today, and I found a state-subsidized nursing home about an hour outside the city. It is cheap, and it will keep her completely out of our hair. "A nursing home?" Jamal asked, sounding mildly hesitant, but not nearly hesitant enough. "Is not that a little harsh? I mean, she is perfectly healthy." "She is a burden," Chloe snapped, slamming her wineglass down on the coaster. She is sitting on a gold mine with this house and whatever retirement funds she has left, and we are drowning. We need control, Jamal. We need to be the legal administrators of her estate. If we put her in that home, we can sell this house, take the profits, and finally live the lifestyle we deserve without constantly worrying about debt. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the gasp that threatened to escape. This was not just about the car. They wanted to erase my existence. They wanted to lock me away in a facility just to plunder the life I built. Jamal sighed, then nodded slowly. You are right. We need the capital. But how are we going to get her to agree to give us legal control? Chloe smirked, twirling her blonde hair around her finger. We do not need her to agree. We just need her signature. You said it yourself, she's getting slow. You bring over a stack of medical insurance updates, slip the power of attorney documents right in the middle and tell her to sign. She trusts you completely. She will not even bother to read them. Yeah. Jamal laughed, a cold, empty sound that shattered the last remaining piece of my motherly devotion. She never questions anything I hand her. It will be incredibly easy. My heart was utterly broken, completely shattered into jagged little pieces on my own living room floor. The boy I had nurtured. The boy I had stayed up with through countless childhood fevers. The man I had protected from financial ruin was sitting just a few feet away, casually plotting my demise. But I did not shed a single tear. Crying is for the defeated, and I was far from defeated. I turned around and walked back out the kitchen door with the same ghostly silence I had used to enter. I walked 2 blocks down the street before I called another taxi. I directed the driver to a quiet, upscale hotel downtown and paid for a room using cash. I needed a secure place to sleep, a place where those vultures could not find me. I spent the entire night sitting at the small desk in the hotel room, drinking black coffee and watching the city lights. By the time the sun began to rise over the skyline, the mother who blindly loved Jamal was dead and gone. In her place was a woman ready to go to war. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, I picked up the phone and dialed the direct line of Mr. Harmon, the brilliant estate lawyer my husband and I had retained decades ago. I explained the situation to him in a voice so steady it surprised even me. I asked him to pull every single file, every deed, and every trust document we had on record. When I arrived at his office an hour later, we sat together in his boardroom going over the paperwork. Listening to my son and his wife plot to steal my assets the night before was painful. But looking at these documents with Mr. Harmon made me realize just how incredibly foolish Jamal and Chloe truly were. They thought I was just a retired school principal living on a modest pension. They thought this house was my only asset. They had absolutely no idea about the ironclad financial fortress my husband and I had built, or the fact that they did not own a single thing in their luxurious life. Working with Mr. Harmon, I silently constructed a legal trap so tight that they would never see it coming. I pulled into my driveway on Sunday evening right on schedule, as if I had just spent the entire weekend wrapped in plush robes and cucumber masks. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the taxi and pasted on the most serene, oblivious smile I could muster. Jamal and Chloe were already at the front door waiting for me like a pair of devoted children. Jamal rushed down the walkway to grab my overnight bag, while Chloe stood on the porch, beaming a smile so wide and fake it could have won an award. "Welcome home, Mum," she sang out, leaning in to give me a stiff hug that smelled of expensive perfume and cheap lies. "We missed you so much. Did you have a wonderful time relaxing?" I looked right into her bright blue eyes and lied with the same effortless grace she had been giving me for years. It was exactly what I needed, Chloe, I told her. Just a quiet weekend to clear my head. Jamal patted my shoulder, guiding me into the living room as if I were made of fragile glass. "You deserve it, Mum. You have been working so hard your whole life, and lately we have just been a little worried about you." I took a seat in my favorite armchair, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. Worried about me, I asked, tilting my head slightly. Whatever for? Chloe let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and sat on the edge of the sofa, directly across from me. She reached out and placed her manicured hand over mine. Well, Beatrice, we did not want to say anything to upset you before your trip. But your memory has been slipping lately. We are just so concerned for your safety. I kept my face completely blank, waiting for the setup. Chloe reached into her designer pocketbook and pulled out the spare set of keys to my beloved Chevrolet Impala. She placed them on the coffee table with a loud clink. I found these sitting right on the edge of the driveway on Friday afternoon, she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. You must have dropped them when you were walking to the taxi. Beatrice, anyone could have walked by and stolen your car. Or worse, you could have driven it and forgotten how to get back home. The sheer audacity of this woman made the blood pound in my ears. She had deliberately snuck into my kitchen, taken my spare keys off the hook, and was now sitting in my own living room, trying to convince me I was losing my mind. This is a classic tactic of emotional abusers. They twist your reality until you start doubting your own sanity. But I had spent 4 decades managing manipulative teenagers and arrogant parents. I knew exactly how to play this game. I looked down at the keys and then up at my son. Jamal was staring at the floor, suddenly very interested in the pattern of the rug. He could not even look his own mother in the eye, while his wife tried to gaslight me into surrendering my independence. Oh my goodness, I whispered, letting my voice tremble just a fraction. I do not remember leaving them outside at all. I was so sure I hung them up in the kitchen. Chloe squeezed my hand, squeezing it just a bit too hard. It happens to the best of us, Beatrice. Getting older is nothing to be ashamed of, but we have to face reality. You living here all alone driving that old heavy car is just becoming too dangerous. We love you too much to let anything bad happen to you. The transition was seamless. Having established my supposed mental decline, Chloe nodded to Jamal. My son cleared his throat, finally looking up from the rug. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, placing them gently on the coffee table next to my stolen car keys. Mom Jamal began using that gentle, patronizing tone people use when talking to toddlers. Chloe and I have been talking, and we think it is time we help you manage things, just to take the stress off your shoulders. These are just some standard healthcare updates and medical directives. It gives me permission to talk to your doctors and handle your medical bills if you ever get confused again. I stared at the stack of papers. Even from across the table without my reading glasses, I could clearly see the bold legal print at the top of the page. It did not say healthcare directive. It said durable financial power of attorney. If I signed that piece of paper, Jamal would have the immediate legal right to drain my bank account, sell my home, and sign over the title of my Chevrolet Impala to anyone he pleased. They were trying to steal my entire life right in front of my face with a smile and a pat on the hand. A wave of profound grief washed over me. This was the boy I had carried. The boy I had worked late nights to feed the man I had secretly saved from financial ruin. And here he was treating me like a foolish old mark to be conned. But the grief quickly hardened back into ice. I slowly reached out and picked up the pen Jamal had helpfully provided. I let my hand shake visibly as I hovered the pen over the signature line. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes tracking the tip of the pen like a predator watching its prey. You could practically smell the greed oozing out of her pores. I let the pen touch the paper for just a second before I pulled my hand back and let out a long, weary sigh. Jamal. My son, I murmured, making my voice sound incredibly tired and frail. You are right. My mind just is not as sharp as it used to be. Looking at all this legal jargon just makes my head spin. I feel so overwhelmed. Jamal quickly leaned in. You do not need to read it all, Mum. I read it for you. You can just sign the back page and I will take care of the rest. I shook my head slowly, putting the pen down on the table. No, baby. I cannot just sign thing I do not understand. But I do agree that we need to get my affairs in order. In fact, I have been thinking all weekend about my estate. I think it is time I transfer some of my major assets directly into your names. Chloe practically stopped breathing. Her posture stiffened and her blue eyes widened to the size of saucers. Transfer your assets, she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady, but completely failing to hide her excitement. Yes, Chloe, I said, offering her a warm, grandmotherly smile. I think it is time. But I want everything done properly and legally so no one can ever contest it. How about tomorrow morning we all go down to the office of my estate lawyer, Mr. Harmon? We can sign these medical papers there. And while we are at it, I will have him draft the documents to hand over my estate to you two. I watched the greed completely override whatever caution they might have had. Chloe looked at Jamal and nodded vigorously, completely abandoning her concerned daughter-in-law act. Jamal broke into a wide, genuine smile, his eyes flashing with the thought of an easy payday. That sounds like a great idea, Mum, he said quickly, gathering up the papers and stuffing them back into his briefcase. Tomorrow morning at Mr. Harmon's office. We will be there. They had swallowed the bait whole. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and entitlement that they never stopped to wonder why the foolish old woman they were trying to rob was suddenly so willing to give everything away. They thought they had finally won. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own funeral. The next morning, the heavy glass doors of Mr. Harmon's downtown law firm swung open, and Chloe strutted inside as if she were a queen arriving for her coronation. She breezed past the reception desk without so much as a polite greeting to the staff, radiating an air of absolute entitlement. She was dressed in a pristine white designer suit, wearing pearls around her neck, and carrying a handbag that I knew for a fact cost more than 3 months of my retirement pension. She walked with that infuriating, arrogant bounce in her step, practically dragging Jamal behind her by the hand. I was already seated at the massive mahogany conference table, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I kept my head slightly bowed, playing the role of the tired, confused elderly mother they so desperately wanted me to be. Chloe immediately leaned over my chair, enveloping me in a suffocating cloud of her expensive floral perfume. She gripped my shoulder with exaggerated, forceful pats, the kind you would give an obedient dog, and spoke in a loud, slow voice as if I had suddenly gone deaf overnight. She told me not to worry about a single thing today, that she and Jamal were here to take all the big, scary financial responsibilities completely off my frail shoulders, so I could just rest. I simply nodded, keeping my expression entirely blank, while inside a righteous fire was burning so hot it threatened to consume the entire room. Jamal took a seat across from me, adjusting his silk tie nervously. He looked at Mr. Harmon, who was sitting at the head of the table, with his hands neatly folded over a very thick, leather-bound folder. Jamal cleared his throat and put on his best professional voice, telling the lawyer that they were here to sign the medical updates and the power of attorney documents I had supposedly requested the night before. Chloe chimed in, flashing a bright plastic smile at Mr. Harmon, adding that my memory had been slipping terribly lately, and they just wanted to make sure I was protected before my mind completely faded away. Mr. Harmon did not return her smile. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, a brilliant legal mind who had managed my family's affairs for over 2 decades. He looked at Chloe over the rim of his glasses with a gaze so intensely sharp, it made her falter and shift uncomfortably in her leather chair. Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Harmon reached forward and turned the heavy folder around so it faced Chloe and Jamal. Stamped across the front in bold gold lettering were the words, Hughes Family Trust. Chloe reached out eagerly, her manicured fingers practically trembling with greed as she pulled the heavy document toward her. She thought she was about to look at a simple sheet of paper handing over my entire life to her husband. She thought this was the moment she finally won. Chloe flipped open the heavy leather cover, her eyes immediately darting down the thick legal pages, searching for the lines that would grant Jamal total authority over my bank accounts and my home. But as her eyes scanned the intricate paragraphs of the trust, her triumphant smile began to freeze. The color rapidly drained from her perfectly powdered face, leaving her looking like she had just seen a ghost. Her breath hitched in her throat, and her hands began to shake so violently that the thick parchment pages rattled loudly against the mahogany table. Jamal noticed her sudden panic and leaned over, snatching the folder from her hands. He read the first page, then the second, and his jaw practically unhinged in sheer disbelief. I did not wait for them to catch their breath. The time for playing the weak, confused widow was officially over. I sat up straight, squaring my shoulders, and let the full weight of my authority fill the room. I looked directly into my son's terrified eyes and spoke with a voice so sharp and clear it cut through the silence like a whip. I asked them if they honestly believed they were manipulating a helpless, ignorant old black woman, just so they could sell a classic car worth $40,000 behind my back. I watched them flinch as the reality of my tone hit them. I asked them if they had conveniently forgotten exactly who paid the massive down payment on that sprawling mansion they lived in. I asked if they forgot whose bank account had been quietly wiping out their massive credit card debts every single month for the past 2 years, while they paraded around pretending to be wealthy. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, completely paralyzed by the sudden shift in my demeanor. I was no longer the fragile mother he thought he could discard. I was the architect of his entire existence. Mr. Harmon cleared his throat, leaning forward to deliver the legal execution. He looked at Jamal and explained in a cold, detached tone that the mansion they resided in was not in Jamal's name at all, but rather belonged entirely to the Hughes family trust. He continued, pointing out that the luxury sports utility vehicle Chloe drove every day to her country club brunches was leased directly under the trust. Furthermore, the massive business loan Jamal had used to start his so-called successful company had been entirely financed by the trust's capital. Mr. Harmon made it crystal clear that Jamal was nothing more than a conditional beneficiary of this estate. Beatrice Hughes was the sole executive trustee. I had absolute and uncontested power over every single asset, every property, and every dollar. Mr. Harmon looked Chloe right in her tear-filled eyes and told her that Beatrice had the legal right to revoke, liquidate, or transfer any of it at her sole discretion, without needing anyone's permission or a single signature from her son. The realization crashed down on them like a ton of bricks. They did not own the mansion. They did not own the cars. They did not even own the comfortable lifestyle they had been aggressively flaunting to their high society friends. Every single piece of their privileged, arrogant lives belonged to the exact same woman they had spent the last 3 days trying to throw into a cheap, state-run nursing home. The fortune they were so desperately plotting to steal had been holding them up all along, and they had just handed me the scissors to cut the rope. I did not give them a single second to formulate an excuse. I reached into my purse, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen. The recording from the night before echoed loudly through the immaculate office. Chloe's screeching voice filled the room, bragging about paying off her credit cards with my stolen car and plotting to lock me away in a facility. Jamal's chilling laughter followed, mocking my supposed mental decline and bragging about how easy I would be to con out of my independence. The sound of their own cruelty bounced off the walls, leaving absolutely no room for denial or manipulation. Jamal looked like he was going to be physically sick. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving as she began to hyperventilate. I stopped the recording and dropped my phone onto the table. I looked at the two of them and delivered my final judgment. I told them they wanted to be independent, wealthy adults, and as of this morning, they finally were. I announced that I had officially revoked Jamal's status as a beneficiary of the Hughes family trust. I informed them they had exactly 30 days to vacate my property before Mr. Harmon filed a formal eviction notice with the city. Then I turned my eyes to Chloe, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her expensive silk sleeves. I suggested she call a taxi to get back to the mansion because I had the trust, cancel her auto insurance, and order the immediate repossession of her luxury vehicle at 8 o'clock this morning. Jamal dropped from his chair, falling to his knees right there on the office floor, sobbing and begging for my forgiveness. Chloe wailed in sheer panic, completely stripped of her power and humiliated beyond repair. I simply stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked out the door without looking back. A few months have passed since that day in Mr. Harmon's office, and the reality of their new lives hit Jamal and Chloe harder than a freight train. Stripped of my financial safety net, they were completely unable to maintain the illusion of their high society lifestyle. Within exactly 30 days, they were forced to pack up whatever cheap belongings they actually owned and vacate the beautiful mansion I had provided for them. They ended up moving into a cramped, run-down apartment complex on the very outskirts of the city, surrounded by the kind of people Chloe used to mock at her dinner parties. Without my money to quietly pay off her massive credit card bills, Chloe faced a mountain of debt that she could no longer ignore. The woman who once prided herself on being an elite socialite, who looked down her narrow nose at working-class people, was forced to swallow her immense pride and take a minimum wage job as a cashier at a local retail store just to keep the lights on. I heard through the grapevine that their marriage is rapidly crumbling under the heavy weight of their financial ruin, with every night ending in screaming matches as they bitterly blame each other for losing the golden goose. As for me, I have never felt more alive. Every Sunday afternoon, I take my beautifully restored cherry-red Chevrolet Impala out for a long, peaceful drive along the sunlit coastal highway. With the windows rolled down and the warm ocean breeze blowing through my hair, I feel Calvin sitting right there beside me, smiling at the woman I have become. I am finally living for myself. I sold the large suburban house and bought a beautiful, cozy condo by the beach, where I wake up every morning to the soothing sound of the waves. I use the money from the family trust to travel the world, exploring places I only ever dreamed of visiting. And I established a generous scholarship fund to help underprivileged high school students go to college. I have realized a very profound truth during this entire ordeal. It is infinitely better to be sitting all alone in a quiet room, surrounded by absolute respect and dignity, than to harbor greedy, blood-sucking leeches who only wear the mask of family to drain you dry. I bought my freedom, and it is the most precious thing I own. Motherly love is a priceless gift, but mutual respect must always be the unbreakable foundation of any family. Never make the mistake of confusing a mother's endless kindness for foolish weakness. We may forgive many things, but we will never allow ourselves to be destroyed. If you enjoyed my story today, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to hear more raw and real-life stories just like this one. I would love to know where my voice is reaching today. What city are you listening from, and what time is it right now where you are? Please let me know in the comments below. Goodbye, and take care of yourselves until we meet again.